has somebody to actually present to. It's always nicer. I agree with Ian. It's always nice to talk to somebody as opposed to talking to a screen. NQPHN would like to acknowledge the traditional owners as Australia's First Nations peoples and the traditional custodians of this land. We respect their continued cultural and spiritual connection to country, waters, kin and community, and also pay their respects to elders past, present and future. I'd like to open the meeting at 2:04 p.m. This is a unique meeting gathering today. We have Cairns, Torres and Cape, Townsville and Mackay, residential aged care facility managers and aged care community managers here with us today for this wonderful presentation. So I would like to welcome Ian Poalsis and little apologies if I've mispronounced your name, Ian, from Aged and Community Care Providers Association, ACCPA. If I could leave it with you to take it from here. Thank you for joining us today. Please enjoy the presentation, everyone.
Thank you, Darinka. Firstly, from our side, from ACCPA side, we acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander custodians of the many lands from which we meet and their connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander persons. Right, so today what we will do, we will have a look at what ACCPA, who ACCPA is, and we have most of the people on here are also ACCPA members, and it may be a 5 minutes that you will lose in your life, but sometimes it's good to hear things again. Then we'll talk about the aged care reform roadmap, and Anne Liddell will manage that part and also speak to the new Aged Care Act. And then she will also touch on the Aged Care Task Force report, which will become at the end of the day the Chapter 4 of the Aged Care Act. So Anne is the lead in our policy and advocacy team. We have a general manager, and then we have Anne, and then a whole range of other people, but she is the brains of the operations on that side of the business. And then lastly, I will also touch on some issues, and Marianne and Anne are both on the State Member Council of ACCPA, and they worked on a document and refined some of the issues that we have across Queensland specifically, that ACCPA will look at, or what we are looking at policy or specifically advocacy-wise. So we'll share a summary of what they've distilled as the issues, and I'll speak to specifically the RACH issues in that respect. Thanks, Jackie. Right, so I'm the State Manager for Queensland. Most of you would know me. If you don't know me yet, I've been here. Chris was the previous State Manager a couple of years ago. She retired and I took over from her. Right, so our vision and purpose, it's there to enhance the well-being of older Australians through a high-performing, trusted and sustainable aged care sector. Note the focus there on the older Australians, because anything that we as providers in the room and by extension also the PHN and ACCPA does is to enhance their lives. That's our vision. Our purpose is to lead, advocate and provide support, advice and guidance to aged care providers to ensure a high-performing and sustainable aged care sector so that older Australians again can live their best lives. And we trust that we are kicking goals in that respect. Our structure within ACCPA, we have a CEO, Tom Simonson. You may know him from television. He is quite often asked for ACCPA's view, and he's on the various stations, quite often radio, television, and also from communication that most of you will be receiving from ACCPA. He's the CEO and the head of what happens within the organization. We have 5 portfolios, services and sector capacity. Those, some of you may have some of the products that we offer to the market, and we'll speak about them for a second later as well. That's that division. We have corporate services. Of course, we have to have an admin section as well. Member relations, that is the team within which the state managers teams sit. We have policy and advocacy and Liddell's group, and then communications and marketing, which is a new division to make sure that ACCPA and the industry is well understood out there. So our communications and marketing must be sharp. We have, as an organization, 1,100 members. About 17% of those are in Queensland, and we're a growing organization. So 22-23 in that financial year, we acquired 75 new members. The membership, of course, becomes slightly tricky when you have an organization or franchises that become corporate members, and then if they had 20 member organizations or franchisees and they become a corporate member, we lose 19 members, but we still have the same amount of contact to the sector. But just out of interest there. Jackie. So this is the interesting, it's a very busy slide, but you will receive the slides after. So you can go and have in this, if you refer, right, maybe you have interest in Anne's stuff as well, but from my side, this is the most important slide, where you can go in and look at all the different kinds of services that we provide and the member benefits that the ACCPA members have. Access to subject matter experts, access to member engagement forums, like Marianne is the chairperson of one of those forums in Queensland, specialized media support, up-to-date information, awards and recognition, and quite a few others. You can go and check that out. If you want to know more, you can speak to me. Jackie. We have, this slide is just as reference, so I'm not going to do anything with that more than tell you there are links on there that if you want to know more, you can go and you can click on those and work with that. All right. Thank you. That's the first part from me, and we'll take the aged care reform roadmap from here.
Okay, thank you so much, Ian, and hello everybody. I'm joining you from the Kaurna lands of the Adelaide Plains today, and it's a pleasure to be with this group, and I'd just like to acknowledge all the outstanding work that all of you do to connect in and support older people in Queensland. It's an amazing sector to be part of, and I really appreciate the opportunity to tell you more about our work today. So I'm Anne Liddell, I'm Head of Policy at ACCPA, and I work with General Manager for Policy and Advocacy, Roald Versteeg, and work very closely with my team of policy advisors, with our government relations staff and our media and public relations staff to make sure we have a really joined up approach with our policy and advocacy portfolio here at ACCPA. So I'm speaking to you initially about the aged care reform landscape that we are part of at the moment. And this diagram here, I like to speak to what I call the 3 states of aged care. And this borrows from, I guess, change management theory, where when a sector or an industry is going through a huge amount of transformation, they can be in 3 states at once. They can be in the current state of delivering what you need to do at the current time. They can be in a transition state where you need to adapt to change and new reform. And you can be in a future state where you actually need to strategically prepare for what's coming down the pipeline. Now, on the left-hand side in the orange, at the moment, the sector across residential care, home and community care and retirement living and seniors housing is implementing the requirements and understanding the impacts of 2022 and 2023 aged care reform. That includes 2 pieces of legislation that were passed in 2022, known as the Royal Commission Response Act and the Implementing Care Reform Act. The Royal Commission Response Act was actually initially introduced to Parliament by the then coalition government and picked up by the incoming Labor government, and was the first piece of legislation that they passed. The Implementing Care Reform Act was actually a piece of legislation to pass some election commitments of the incoming Labor government. And in addition to that, we saw in 22-23 the results of stage 2 of the Fair Work Value case, and the introduction of industrial relations legislation, as well as seeing the first iteration of the Independent Health and Aged Care Pricing Authority recommending residential care price that is currently in play at the moment. And that is a really important post-Royal Commission reform that we've seen take shape. So that means you're in relation to those reforms, you're in the deliver and adapt phases. On the right-hand side, you'll see a red box, and this is where you're in transition state and future state for the forward program for aged care reform. And you're looking at really that period going from at least 2024 to 2027 and beyond in terms of implementation. So, of course, the big one, which we'll talk to in more detail shortly, is the New Aged Care Act. And that was a headline recommendation of the Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety. Also is the supported home program and the commencement for home care providers and others in mid-2025, with the CHSP services to come online no sooner than mid-2027. There is still a lot of policy and funding designed to go under the bridge, water to go under the bridge when it comes to supported home, and we're very proactive in that space. We'll also see the government response to the David Tune capability review of the Commission, and that should see already the Commission have been making responses to the David Tune review, but the government's response will be a very interesting thing to watch when it comes to a regulator that can be fit for purpose for the future, including with respect to a New Aged Care Act. Also, if that all wasn't enough for the sector, we've got the very pivotal and critical piece of work of the Aged Care Task Force, which I'll talk to again in detail later in the presentation. And we're currently awaiting the government response to the final report of the task force that was released in March. And we're going to see more from the Independent Health and Aged Care Pricing Authority, with it continuing to price on residential care with improvements on the first iteration of pricing methodology. And then it will be making its first pricing recommendation to government on home care pricing for supported home. And that pricing recommendation is due in December this year. So we are very conscious at ACCPA that you are grappling with all those three states, and please reach out to us. We do have support for members. So if you feel that you'd like to know more information, I'm sure Ian can connect you with the right people. And this slide is about the government's own, department's own account of the reform activity that is underway. And they have on their website a reform roadmap that shows all the key reform activity from October 22 to July 2025. It runs for 3 pages. It's best printed on an A3, just to give you a top tip. And I should say it is the key reform activity. It doesn't cover everything. We're aware of at least 70 reform projects afoot in the Department of Health and Aged Care since the Royal Commission landed. And so it is a massive, massive piece of reform for the aged care sector since the March 2021 Royal Commission report was handed to government. The dates in the department's roadmap are subject to change, but I do encourage you to have a look at that document, and I'll put a link into it in the chat. Just give me a moment, because it is a very useful thing to have on your wall or talk to your staff about, particularly to help, I guess, that forward planning piece. And we at ACCPA, you know, not many industries go through this level of transformation, and probably in your lifetime you would have seen, for example, the automotive industry go through massive periods of structural transformation and reform, the influence of technology on other industries, and the influence of Royal Commission on other sectors. Aged care, to transform well, we need to be supported by an industry implementation reform plan, and we've been calling for that ever since the Royal Commission report was released, and we continue to call for that because we know that our members are pivotal to implementing and transforming the aged care sector well, and that change management takes skill, it takes time, it takes resources. It means you need to lead your workforces. It means you need to advise your boards and have your boards lead you through that change process as well. So we are keen to continue to call on government for a strategic suite of funding to support the industry to transform. And we do that in many different ways, not just one call, but we do that through a range of submission opportunities and advocacy opportunities. Thanks, Jackie. So now I'll move on to the New Aged Care Act. And interestingly, you may, if you're following the media releases of Minister Wells today, you may be aware that there has been an announcement. We have at ACCPA been very proactive in engaging with our members. We've had one of our largest engagement processes ever on the New Aged Care Act. And one of the areas of prominence for us in our submission was the reform timeline. We have been in a situation where, while there was a 10-week period of consultation on the exposure draft of the New Aged Care Act, which was extended, including influenced by advocacy from ACCPA, it was very, very difficult to see how the government could really achieve a commencement date of 1st of July 2024. They were basically looking at doing concurrent policy development of consultation and drafting at the same time in order to get it through into Parliament and through the parliamentary processes, including a Senate inquiry. Now, today, you'll see in this orange box on the right, Minister Wells released a statement where she has advised that the government is now considering extensive and valuable feedback to refine and finalise the draft legislation before it is introduced to Parliament. We will update the commencement date of the legislation following these updates and before the bill is introduced to Parliament. So, while it's not specifically cited, one might infer from this that the 1st of July 2024 commencement date is no longer, and that by the time the bill is introduced to Parliament, the government will have set a new commencement date. So ACCPA has just issued a media release where we welcome this announcement and we reiterate our commitment to providing the insights of our members through a genuine consultation process. And I might just pop the media release into the chat. So if you're really interested in the latest up-to-date information, you can find that there now. So in terms of our process, we have both process concerns and content concerns. It's really important to us and our members that the sector is ready to implement particularly the new reforms that come with the New Aged Care Act. It is a challenge when there are missing sections of the exposure draft, and also it's not clear that the subordinate legislation, i.e. the rules, where a lot of the detail is housed and which is able to be approved by Minister Wells, is not yet clear whether that will be made accessible for engagement and consultation. So there is a need for genuine consultation that we've been calling for. We are optimistic that both the missing sections, including the funding or finance section of Chapter 4, and the rules will go out to public consultation, and we will certainly be ready to support our members, give their insights on that. But to give you an example of the detail, the final wording, proposed wording of the standards will be in the rules. So while has been a lot of work and development and engagement and consultation done, it's really important that we still see what is being proposed as the final of the detail of such an important reform. Now, I've just spoken to the commencement date, and it looks like that will be beyond 1st of July 2024. Now, the timing of introduction to Parliament and expected Senate inquiry, that may well be pushed out, and the Senate inquiry as to how long it goes for is something that we'll be watching. It's really, for new legislation of this magnitude, it is really important that the parliamentary processes can be undertaken, and we of course will be following its passage through Parliament and will be contributing to a Senate inquiry process, which one would expect might include submissions and possibly even hearings. Now, in addition to our process concerns come with the new reform, sorry Jackie, just go back, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to mention that in addition to the ones I've mentioned to date, there is an important difference between a commencement date of legislation and the transition timeframes that are built into the legislation for new reform. So to give you an example, you may be aware that in the 2022 legislation, there were strengthened governance standards for existing providers. From the time it was known that what those rules were on the 1st of December 2022, there was a year to prepare. So from the 1st of December 2023, providers had that 12 months to prepare and are now being audited or expected to comply with those strength and governance standards. Well, we expect the same for transition timeframes for this new Aged Care Act, particularly for new reform. And we're asking for at least 6 to 12 months from the time at which all information is available. And by that, we mean the rules, the guidance materials, and so that it is clear and distinct to our members what they're expected to deliver under regulation and legislation. We also expect a staged approach, so that I think there's about 12 or so new reforms at least in the new legislation, and we don't want to see them all commencing at the same time. That's just not feasible or practical for any organisation. So we're asking for a staged approach, and we're also, again, that call for dedicated funding so providers can be supported with transition and implementation and change management. Thanks, Jackie. In terms of our content concerns, as I mentioned, we had very extensive engagement with members to develop up our concerns, and we created a submission that was a very proactive and constructive submission. We made 27 recommendations. We also engaged a legal advisor, Victor Harcourt, Principal of Russell Kennedy Lawyers, to prepare draft amendments backing up our positions, so that what we provided to government was a package, to the department was a package that could be readily reviewed and potentially adopted. Some of our key concerns included, and many of these may have been concerns for you as well, statutory duties on providers and responsible persons and associated penalties, including criminal penalties. Definitions and key concepts, including an aspirational definition of high quality care without any indication of that being funded for the sector. No responsibilities for care recipients, and we think that it's quite important, particularly for the workers that you have that you employ to care for older people, that there be an understanding that what comes with receiving care is also obligations for common sense approaches in response. And we also noted that a complaints commissioner should actually be independent of the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commissioner, as well as noting the lack of legislative timeframes for the department and commission to achieve things by. There is an increased role for the Commission in the legislation, so we think it's really important that it's understood, the sector is able to understand how the Commission will undertake and by when its responsibilities. Supporters and representatives was a particularly key issue, and we have recommended that be paused. While it's a valuable idea, we think until there's harmonisation with states and territories and full engagement with states and territories, that to implement it too soon could be counterproductive to the experience of consumers and their families and representatives. And obviously whistleblower requirements is another area of interest to us. And I'll pop a link to our submission in the chat in case you aren't aware of it yet. And pages 6, our recommendations start on page 6. So I encourage you to take a look. So those that are ACCPA members can be assured of what we are advocating for in your interests, and those that are not ACCPA members can really see what we are trying to do for the sector as a whole. So in terms of the next steps for the new Aged Care Act, obviously I've mentioned we'll engage with the Senate inquiry when it's announced. We continue and continually engage with the department regarding the new Aged Care Act. We have done in the lead up to the exposure draft, during the exposure draft, and now again after the exposure draft to really reinforce the points of our submission. And we have 2 meetings scheduled with the Assistant Secretary responsible for this legislation, Mel Metz, in the month of April. And we will continue to engage with all sides of politics. Our government relations staff are on the ground daily in Canberra, engaging with politicians of all sides of the fence. And in terms of the unknowns, obviously the consultation process on those yet to be released parts of the new Aged Care Act and the subordinate legislation are still unclear, but we are optimistic that our advocacy to ensure that we get a line of sight to that and that there is a consultation period, that government will listen to that call. And I should also say that if you have questions, I think there might be time, Ian, after our presentation, hopefully to field any questions. And obviously we can take any on notice and respond back to Dorinka later. All right, next slide. Thanks, Jackie. So let's talk in more detail about the Aged Care Task Force. As I mentioned, this is a really critical and seminal opportunity for the sector. One of the policy vacuums that was left by the final report of the Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety was that the two commissioners, while both recommended a form of levy, their preference for how that levy might be introduced and designed and implemented was different. And the coalition government was one of the few recommendations of the Royal Commission that were rejected outright. About 85% of the 148 recommendations were accepted or accepted in principle, but those were not. And what that meant is it left a policy vacuum for some years, and the really pivotal question of how the sustainability of aged care and the sector will manage, not just now, but into the future, when the demand for ageing services increases greatly. And you will have, hopefully you would have heard of the Intergenerational 2023 report that projects that demand, and aged care is now a top 5 government expenditure item, along with NDIS, defence spending, interest repayments, and health spending. So Minister Wells mid last year brought together a task force of 16 members from across the sector, including experts as well in economics and aged care funding and finance, as well as peak bodies. And Tom Simonson, ACCPA CEO, was appointed to the task force. They met from July to December last year. And they met monthly and deliberated on a range of sustainability issues. And that report, long awaited as it was, it did get finally released in March this year. And we have welcomed the final report. We believe it will provide a way forward on funding for aged care providers and giving our members the support they need to provide quality care services and ensure sustainability of the aged care sector. There are a lot of big issues being grappled with in the final report. They provide a series of 7 principles and about 17 recommendations. There is still a lot of detail to sit underneath those recommendations, but we are awaiting a government response and hope to hear more by federal budget on 14th of May. Now, it does include recommendations for immediate issues facing the sector, as well as recommendations for the longer term. Overall, we at ACCPA consider the final report to be person-centred, to be a sustainable approach, if we consider it to be balanced, and we also see it as future-focused. All very important things for addressing really setting up the sector to transform as the Royal Commission intended. Next slide, please. In terms of more detail, when it comes to sustainability, it does recommend an increased role for consumer co-contributions from those who have the means, but in particularly important to stress that this is underpinned by a strong safety net for those who may not have the means. We also see it as future focused, and that funding settings will see aged care to be more viable to meet future demand. We see that it is transparent, and it calls for aged care fees to be simpler, to be fairer, for consumers to know what the costs are up front when accessing care and when planning for the future. We also see it as person-centred, and that older people have choice and control, and that they're able to live at home and then in their community safely for as long as they can. And that is one of the first principles of the Task Force final report. So as I said, we're awaiting the government response, and we are looking forward to being involved in any future policy work that sits underneath some of those recommendations. And there are recommendations relating to both residential care, particularly the role of refundable accommodation deposits, or RADs, and also support at home, and the idea of, for both residential care and home community care, as I mentioned, that there be an increased role for consumer contributions, particularly for non-care related activities. But also stressing that the report does note that government, while a levy is not recommended, that government should still be the majority funder for aged care in Australia. Thank you, Jackie. And I'll pass back to Ian now to discuss the issues for Queensland members. Back to you, Ian.
Thanks, Anne. I think I touched on it earlier that in Queensland and in all the states, we have a state member council. So those are members that are elected, that go into the state member council of ACCPA, and some of the people that I see in the room, Marianne and Ern, are on that council. It's not a governance council, but it is basically our brains trust. And the feedback that we get from these groups, these councils in the different states, feed up to a national council, and then and Roald, the general manager, they see the distilled issues, what our members are struggling with. And then it makes it much easier for them with the insight, and not only the statement of problems, but also suggested solutions. They can work with that. So if we look at the current concerns identified by the Queensland providers, there are 4 main items that they had around 30 of those 30 items, and they distilled it down to these 4 as for this year in 2024. Let's focus on them. And the first is regarding the impact of the new Aged Care Act and the ability of the residential aged care sector to meet requirements, both in terms of workforce capacity and financial viability. Of course, you can have the best rules in the world, but if you do not have the capacity to reach that, it won't help. Impact on board directors, and we quite often see have inquiries around that and the impact for personal liability and even criminal liability. The timing of the implementation, of course, that's something that was addressed today, and I think the fact that our team were also strongly advocating for realism regarding the implementation dates, that has probably stemmed from input like this from different providers to force, in a way, the government to rethink their date of the 1st of July. One thing that the Queensland State Member Council has asked for, and I don't know if Anne has any knowledge of if this will be available or possible at some stage, is a clear comparison of the old and the new, and what the real risk to providers are under the new Aged Care Act. So a comparison between requirements in the past and what is changing. That may be part of the process as we move forward, but I am not the person to give the final view on that. Maybe, and when we get to the Q&A session, you'll have a view on that one. The second main item that they identified was the review of the star ratings. What has been the impact on improving resident care? And the general view, or the anecdotal view, is that it hasn't had any impact, but it has a real administrative burden. So that is the ask is, at the end of the day, a clarification of the care minute calculations and what influence that also will have on star ratings. The third item that was identified was the wait times for assessments that are too long, both in residential and community, and the government, in this case, the Queensland government has a responsibility there to have a ready workforce for ACAT available. And that is something that from the state officer side, we're engaging with the Queensland government with. That's one of the advocacy items that we have. And I don't know if, and nationally, if you're talking about that specifically, but because it's a state, ACAT is a state-based issue, we're also working on that from the state team as well. The last item, and some of you will be surprised that it wasn't the first item, is regarding workforce. And then we're talking how and in what format will ACCPA be able to help with training and support on the workforce side. And we have of course a lot of programs in that regard. And then the last focus that they are looking for was regarding support with immigration. We have the Palm scheme, and we have some other business ventures, people that are bringing in workers from, for instance, we have an industry partner called GrowWorks, and they bring quite large numbers of workers from the Philippines in. So they do the education and the training out in the Philippines, and they bring them in cohorts of around 50 people at a time. And what can we from ACCPA side do to make sure that all the solutions that are found for the workforce problems, that it line up, and that everyone knows exactly what is available and how we can support you guys. There's a lot of dense information, and as I was listening to you, I realized that this is probably the densest 45 minutes that a lot of these people in the room would have had so far in 2024, with a lot of information coming to you. But if you loosen yourself and you shake your brain a little bit with all the information, the thing that you must remember that we have the Queensland Conference, the ACCPA conference at the end of April. So we're talking 4 weeks away, and the early bird closes on the 5th of April. So we're talking in 2 days' time. The link is there. It is a blast. I don't know if we at the end of the day have a moment, Darinka, we can even ask Anna Hearn what she thought about the conference last year. But I don't want to advertise it too much. People must realize, and they will feel the FOMO, and then they will all be there. So if you haven't decided to come yourself, or you haven't sent some of your staff, or you have to ask a boss to send you, now is the time, and you've got a day and a half to achieve, get a Guernsey for the Queensland Conference. Thanks, Darinka. That was the presentation.
Did we have any questions for Ian and Anne? Did we have any questions if anyone was shy and they wanted to type it into the chat? Because I do know that people get shy.
If Darinka, while they are thinking about that, maybe Anne Ahern, I'm putting her on the spot. I know.
I was going to say, that's not very nice.
I know her well enough that I think she'll be okay. Maybe she'll be willing to share what her experience of the conference was last year.
Thank you, Ian. No, the conference last year was amazing. I made some amazing networks. The booths with all the exhibitionists are really, really good. It's just an amazing experience to go down, and it's really good to meet people face to face that you see virtually all the time. So, and the copious amounts of alcohol at the dinner is a really good excuse to go down as well.
Just to clarify, I wasn't one of the exhibitionists.
No, but you had a hand in the copious amounts of alcohol. It's well worth the money spent.
No worries. I do understand that the presentation will be. Thank you very much, Anne. I do appreciate your input there, and sounds like a fun conference, and all the managers seem to be here on board. So it looks like you guys could maybe all get together and catch up. It is a good opportunity always that you meet face to face. That's why we encourage you to turn your cameras on. As you said, it's nice to see people's faces, but meeting them is something special. You get to really engage with them. There's a question here. Oh, no, there's not a question, sorry. There's a lot of links in the chats, so please make sure you grab those links. I will send them out as well. But it's always, I like to click on the links now and then take a good read of them later. Please do that. But if there's no further questions at this point in time, I'd like to really thank you guys for your time. That was a wonderful presentation. You can always get in contact with these guys. Did you want to put your contact details in this chat now as well, while people are still in the chat? but they can always come through us if they can't get through to you guys. So they can come through to us and send their details, and we can send it through if that's necessary. So there's always an avenue to get in contact. We will be sending out the PowerPoint presentation, but we won't be sending out the recording. So thank you very much. So for those who are not, and I'd like to thank all of those who are not part of the Townsville Network group that have joined me here today. So I would like to say thank you again.